demo in this webinar, but ideally, these are the sources that I've been talking about before. You get them into the platform as quickly as possible with our out-of-the-box controls or defining a custom connector in any way that you want as easily as possible, so that you then end up with this data foundation, ideally also including something like an employee record. If you have that, if you have an authoritative source for all of your employees, then by all means take that up into the data foundation as well and tie all the different accounts in the different systems that you have to these HR records. So you then get to a data foundation with the employee central and lots of very interesting metadata for these controls that I've shown you on the slide before. Like, for example, orphaned accounts based on their status of HR or their end date, or for example, for role mining or based on the function description, whatever. And then take all of these accounts, link it to that, and then you can apply this security framework, this control framework. So you end up with your top, your most important applications, the users, the groups, the roles, and whatever is the thing that determines who can access what, all in one data foundation. You apply your controls, and then after a few days, you should have this overview of, let's say, 40 or 50 of the security controls that together show you where your highest risks are, so that you can start prioritizing next cleanup actions based on those risks. For example, this is a control about admin Active Directory accounts linked to inactive employees, typically one of the more risky controls. And if there are lots of results, then by all means focus on those, on cleaning up those first. And then automatically this is tracked over time for you later on, giving you also the audit proof, maybe to CISO, maybe to external auditors, to show that you are improving, that you are taking action. And so in general, it's about getting the data together, about then applying these controls. You can go into more detail if you want. So especially core security teams, core IAM teams, really interested in, if they see this data for the first time, they probably know what to look for. They know from some special cases from 5 years ago, they want to visualize that, bring that to management and quantify where the largest risks are. Maybe one more thing in terms of the analysis that I would like to show as well is that, well, you have these controls, you have these very black or white controls, but what is also very interesting is to compare the accesses of employees to each other. For example, with a view like this, I prepared it before the webinar, where you have the 25 people of, in this case, were 25 employees of a certain cost center. I added a column for the AD groups that they have, and then you get to a visualization like this in a few clicks. And this is important from the perspective of risk detection. And because in every customer, every proof of concept that we have done this visualization, we always find these red crosses, which are cases where only a few select people of a team that you would expect that are able to do the same are able to do these specific things. And most of the time, that's because there's a problem with the mover processes, and these people have moved throughout the organizations, have been given more and more permissions over time, but never been revoked. So this here clearly is potential risk lying around. It's probably the case that Aurélie Quantum is not, should not have these permissions as the only one in her team. And that's the perfect question to ask to a line manager in an access review. And more on that in a few seconds. And then secondly, also, if you're looking at this data from a role mining perspective, then the commonalities are interesting. And in this case, you see that it probably isn't that good an idea to create a role for these people all together, because there are very little commonality shared across all of these people, but there do seem to be some subgroups. So if you're thinking in that kind of exercise, then by all means use data like this to visualize the current permissions of your employees, and don't start just evaluating or interviewing people top down, because it will cost you way more time and effort while you have the data to support this exercise as well. But what I wanted to add as well, to say as well here, in that for the case of the webinar, the customer case in this webinar, their focus really was on Active Directory first. And so in their case, they found active orphaned accounts pretty quickly, and they were then able to clean up this in a matter of weeks. And that was really important to the CISO in that case, because identity governance had an image of being expensive and years of work. And the CISO really made a point of it, of wanting to apply this risk-first approach and show to others in the organization that also in that case, rapid success could be made. And so the overall impact there was a clear view of the largest risks, then immediate security improvements after that, and then an audit proof of doing this necessary work, which was in their case very important to show to the National Bank that they were taking actions on the topic of user access governance. And then, of course, prioritize their next steps. And that's a very brief overview of the first two phases in this picture. And so after that, what I've shown you in the product very briefly is really targeted to the security team, or should you have it an IAM team. But at some point, the security team doesn't know everything anymore. Also because if you think back to this view here, from a security perspective, you can determine based on the data that this is likely a risk that or overly privileged people. But the only one that can tell that are either these people themselves or someone like a team leader who is responsible for the accesses of their team. Meaning that then at some point you have to include others in the organization, depending on your governance structure, like line managers, team leaders, application owners, maybe data owners, if you have that in the structure of your file shares and so on. And these people are typically less technical and only responsible for a part of the whole. So ideally, you do not provide them with this same very technical, very extensive interface, but only with a very specific question in the form of what we call an access review, or sometimes called a recertification as well. And so that recertification uses this very similar view. I also created a recertification for this view here. And what then happens is that that person receives an email with automated follow-up if they don't respond in time and so on. And the question is way more specific than just take a look at everything. So the flow is very, very, very easy to follow. It's, hey, Martin, your input is needed. Secondly, the question, these are the people that we still see in your team. Is that correct? And imagine that someone already left my team, so we don't want to think about that one in the review anymore. And then secondly, a view very similar to the one that we saw before, which we chose because this still is very technical data. So probably line managers will not be able to think of all details of these groups, of these AD groups in this case, but patterns are easier to see. And for example, imagine that everyone in the team should be able to do these things here, but no one, if you look at the outliers and my explanation of before, should be able to do that because security sensitive, please remove, something like that. Another overview, you submit, and the changes are recorded automatically into the system. Meaning that these access reviews, you put them in a campaign, you can track who has filled out their campaigns. This is their access review. This is the one. So this is the one that I just created here before. And so those things, that's what you want to track over time. And all of the changes that were then inputted are automatically stored here. We do not provision them back. We do not write back to the system, to the core systems themselves, but at least you can track them here. And if the data is refreshed, apologies, if the data is refreshed and we see that based on the data, if someone requested that an account should be removed, it's actually not there anymore. This is automatically turned from open to resolved, giving you the final cornerstone of the closed loop governance that we talked about. So you now have the visibility, you can detect risks, you can involve others in the process as well. If anyone indicates that something should be changed, you have these changes here, and you even have the audit proof that you actually did the work itself. And that's what we mean with an approach to getting control and staying control much faster with a much lower total cost of ownership than deploying a full IGA suite. And the essence, really, from my opinion, as somewhat a product owner, is looking at identity governance as a data problem. And so, again, look at the timelines here. That's what makes this feasible also for companies with smaller security teams to take this up. And what I've said, what I've shown you is that at the start you do this exercise in the process of a cleanup. So ideally, you also don't send out access reviews for all of the AD groups of people at the start, but you for example, focus on these queries here. And if you have a list of AD accounts not logged on for the last 6 months, ask about those first. Ask line managers, hey, we see these accounts in your part of the organization. We think that they are not needed anymore. Could you give us your blessing as well? If they are still needed, then we keep them, no biggie. But honestly, if they're not needed, then we should remove them or at least disable them. That's the type of question, the type of discussion that you should get around this type of product. That's governance. And then afterwards, of course, once you are in control, then you mature to more continuous monitoring and governance, where you probably will review all of the Active Directory groups every 6 months, every 3 months, based on your risk posture. So the access reviews that I discussed, and that's everything that I wanted to say about the platform. So the platform, again, getting the data in there, indicating or finding out risk, and then cleaning this up and running your access review.